They brought the 16-year-old kid in for defacing a wall, but I quickly realized the mural was the distraction. The real target was sitting on the bench. The air in courtroom B was thick, heavy with the scent of old paper and barely suppressed anxiety. I sat at the defense table, my knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the polished oak. My client, Marcus, shifted nervously beside me. He was 16, tall for his age, and terrified. He'd been caught spray painting a mural, a beautiful, intricate piece that celebrated black history in our predominantly white, ultra-conservative town. The charge was misdemeanor vandalism, but Judge Harrison made it sound like high treason. Judge Harrison, a man whose face seemed permanently etched into a sneer of disapproval, leaned forward, his silver hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. He looked down his nose at Marcus, his voice booming, designed to echo in the high-ceilinged room. "Mr. Jenkins, this court has seen enough of your kind disrupting the peace. Another offense like this, and you'll be facing serious time. Are you even capable of understanding the seriousness of destroying public property?" I cleared my throat, ready to interject with the mitigating circumstances, the community support, the artistic merit, the fact that the vandalism was on an abandoned wall nobody cared about until the local paper ran a hit piece. But Harrison waved a dismissive hand at me before I could speak. "Silence, counsel. I am addressing the defendant." Harrison paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. "Frankly, I am embarrassed that I even have to waste the court's time on this. Your file suggests a pattern of disrespect for authority. I suspect this entire performance is just an attention-seeking stunt." Marcus's face, which had been pale, flushed a deep, angry red. He balled his fists in his lap. I subtly shook my head at him, urging restraint. Harrison, however, was not interested in restraint. He was conducting a symphony of contempt. "Tell me, Jenkins," the judge continued, tapping his gavel sharply against the sound block, "do you think the rules that govern this community apply to you? Do you think your art somehow elevates you above the laws that keep decent citizens safe? Because in this courtroom, you are nothing but a juvenile delinquent about to learn a very hard lesson about respect." That was it. The simmering resentment in the room, the subtle shift in the gallery, the way the bailiff's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, all sharpened instantly. I knew I had to intervene now, or Marcus would erupt, and that would seal his fate 10 times over. "Your Honor, with all due respect," I started, keeping my tone measured, almost painfully polite. "Marcus has fully cooperated, his priors are minor, and we have numerous letters here detailing his commitment to changing his path. He's a talented young man who made a mistake under poor guidance, and—" Harrison slammed the gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "I have heard enough of your defense, young man. You are clearly in over your head if you think soft words can erase this disrespect. This town has standards, and I intend to uphold them. Look at him, Miss Davies. Look at the defiance in his eyes." I looked at Marcus. His eyes were indeed defiant, but underneath that I saw a flicker of something else, something calculating, something that didn't belong in the eyes of a scared teenager. He wasn't looking at the judge anymore. He was looking just past Harrison's right shoulder, toward the large framed portrait hanging on the wall behind the bench, the portrait of Judge Harrison's deceased father, also a long-serving magistrate in this county. Harrison followed Marcus's gaze, momentarily breaking his tirade. "What are you looking at, Jenkins? Are you admiring the standard you failed to meet?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the courtroom noise like shattered glass. "No, Your Honor. I was just admiring your father's taste in framing." The courtroom held its breath. Harrison blinked. That small comment shouldn't have been offensive, but the way Marcus said it, the precision, the implied meaning, sent a jolt through me. I felt an icy dread snake up my spine. "What is that supposed to mean?" Harrison demanded, his face going from stern to dangerously pale. Marcus slowly tilted his head, a chillingly neutral expression replacing his anger. "It means the frame is quite ornate, solid oak, custom-made perhaps, but there's a very small, almost invisible scratch on the lower left corner of the molding. It looks like someone tried to cover it up with a cheap touch-up pen. A poor repair for such a valuable piece, wouldn't you agree? I watched Harrison. The blood drained completely from his face. His hand, which had been resting near the gavel, began to tremble violently. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the corner of the portrait Marcus had indicated, his composure shattering instantly. It was like watching a statue crack. How could you possibly know that?" Harrison whispered, his booming courtroom voice reduced to a pathetic rasp. "That detail, that scratch. Nobody knows about that scratch." Marcus smiled, a slow, terrible expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I know a lot of things about that wall, Your Honor, including what's behind it, especially since I spent 3 nights sketching out the perfect spot to paint my mural, right next to that portrait, before I even put the first can of paint down." Harrison stared, paralyzed, the realization dawning in his eyes with horrifying clarity. He looked down at the evidence folder on his bench, then back up at Marcus, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He wasn't looking at a defiant teenager anymore. He was looking at someone who held the key to his total professional annihilation. I braced myself, wondering what secret Marcus had uncovered that could stop a sitting judge dead in his tracks. Something far worse than graffiti. And then Marcus delivered the killing blow, his voice gaining a sudden, icy authority that belied his age. "You see, Your Honor, the scratch wasn't made by accident. It was made by a loose piece of metal when someone, late one night, about 6 months ago, was trying very hastily to pry open that wall panel to retrieve something they'd hidden inside. The courtroom dissolved into a static silence, broken only by the frantic scribbling of the court reporter trying to keep up with the implosion happening at the bench. Judge Harrison didn't breathe. His eyes darted from Marcus to the portrait, then back to Marcus, a raw, desperate terror replacing the arrogance that had defined him moments before. "You're mistaken, Jenkins," Harrison managed, his voice a strained whisper, laced with a desperate plea for denial. "That's absurd. You are grasping at straws to avoid accountability for your crime." Marcus merely tilted his head, his gaze unwavering, almost pitying. "Am I, Your Honor? Because I spent a lot of time studying the acoustics of this room, the sight lines, and the best way to approach your bench without drawing immediate suspicion from the bailiffs. And I noticed something else, something about the portrait's mounting brackets. They're new, far newer than the rest of the frame, which, as you know, has been hanging there since 1988. I felt a cold sweat break out on my own neck. I had defended Marcus for weeks, using every legal strategy in the book, but this wasn't lawyering. This was psychological warfare, and I was completely out of the loop. What was he doing? "The panel behind the portrait isn't just decorative, is it, Your Honor?" Marcus continued, leaning closer to the microphone, his voice carrying perfectly through the PA system. "It's a false back, built into the wall cavity. A perfect place to store something small, valuable, and easily forgotten, especially if you were a magistrate with deep ties to the town's less savory dealings." Harrison slammed his fist on the bench, a futile attempt to regain control. "Bailiff, remove this boy. He is out of order. Contempt of court." The bailiff, however, remained frozen, his gaze fixed on the judge, sensing the seismic shift in power. Harrison was no longer presiding. He was pleading for mercy from a teenager. "You can't remove me, Your Honor," Marcus said calmly, "because if you try to have me forcibly removed, I will activate the small device I slipped into the ventilation grate right over there." He gestured casually toward the ceiling vent near the jury box, a gesture that caused 3 jurors to instantly lean away from the grate. "It's not a bomb, Your Honor. Nothing so theatrical. It's a remote trigger attached to a Bluetooth transmitter. And that transmitter is currently broadcasting the audio recording of everything you just said to me. Every threat, every accusation, every veiled implication, directly to the State Ethics Commission's anonymous tip line." My jaw dropped. I stared at Marcus, completely blindsided. He hadn't just been caught vandalizing, he had been setting a trap. The mural wasn't the crime, it was the camouflage. "You have 60 seconds," Marcus stated, his voice dropping to a level that required everyone in the room to strain to hear, forcing Harrison to lean in, completely exposed. "You will immediately dismiss all charges against me with prejudice. You will sign the order right now, without noting anything unusual in the record. If you hesitate, if you try to call security, if you even blink wrong, that recording goes live across every local media outlet, complete with your father's portrait as visual accompaniment." Harrison's eyes were wild, flicking between the microphone, the portrait, and Marcus. His career, decades of carefully curated respectability, was hanging by a thread over a digital audio file. He knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. The sheer meticulousness of the setup proved that this was premeditated, a calculated counterattack. What did you hear?" Harrison choked out, sweat beading on his forehead, running in rivulets down his temples. Marcus leaned in close enough that the judge could smell the spearmint gum he was chewing. "I didn't just hear what you said to me, Your Honor. I heard what you said to Mr. Albright last Tuesday, right here in chambers, about diverting those zoning fines into the Harrison Family Trust before the audit came through. I heard what you promised Albright regarding that land sale near the river. It's all saved. So, dismiss the case, Judge. Let me walk free, and you get to keep your reputation, and whatever is currently hidden behind that poorly touched-up corner." Harrison snatched a pen, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold it. He frantically pulled the dismissal order toward him. He was about to sign, his entire future resting on the whim of a teenager, when his eyes caught something else on the desk. The evidence log detailing the spray paint cans we had submitted just an hour earlier. His panic snapped, replaced by a flicker of cold, terrifying clarity, the clarity of a cornered predator. He stopped writing, the pen hovering millimeters above the signature line. He looked past Marcus toward the gallery wall where I was sitting. "Davies," Harrison said, his voice regaining a dangerous resonance, a chilling echo of his earlier authority. "I need to see Miss Davies' phone. Confiscate it immediately. I believe she may have been complicit in tampering with evidence, potentially aiding and abetting this blackmail attempt." The bailiff, jolted back into action by the sudden redirection of authority, finally moved, lunging directly toward my table. Marcus hadn't accounted for my involvement, or perhaps he hadn't considered the possibility that I too was about to be caught in the crossfire of this explosive confession. As the bailiff reached for my wrist, Marcus yelled, "No! Wait!" But it was too late. My phone was pulled from my hand. Harrison snatched it before the bailiff could even secure it properly, his eyes locking onto the screen. He bypassed the lock in a single, practiced motion, a motion that suggested he'd done this before, and his gaze landed immediately on the notification banner showing a series of recent file transfers. Harrison didn't even look at the audio recording app. He looked at the storage summary, his face contorting in confusion, then dawning horror as he saw the sheer volume of data Marcus had transferred onto my device just this morning, before the hearing even began. He clicked on the transfer log, and his eyes widened as he read the file names. They weren't threats against him. They were evidence logs, witness testimonies, and meticulously detailed spreadsheets outlining years of judicial misconduct by the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, all routed through Marcus's burner account and dumped onto my encrypted drive while I was preparing opening statements. Harrison hadn't been the target of Marcus's trap. He had merely been the messy, convenient bait. And now, by seizing my phone to expose Marcus, Judge Harrison had just incriminatingly proven his access to evidence proving the highest-ranking judge in the state was corrupt. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening, a vacuum where frantic accusation had just reigned. Judge Harrison stood frozen, the phone, now a smoking gun of systemic corruption, clutched in his hand. His face cycled through confusion, betrayal, and finally a profound, devastating understanding. He hadn't just walked into a trap, he had stumbled onto a high-level wire job, and by attempting to protect himself from Marcus, he had just implicated himself in the much larger conspiracy by accessing evidence that proved his own boss was compromised. "What is this?" Harrison whispered, looking at the screen, not at Marcus, but at the file names listing offshore accounts and undisclosed real estate holdings under the Chief Justice's name. This isn't about me. Marcus pushed away from the defense table, finally standing fully upright. He looked exhausted, the intense focus draining away to reveal the tired teenager beneath. No, Your Honor. You were the necessary distraction. You were loud, petty, and predictable. The mural? That was my insurance policy. The thing I knew you couldn't ignore without looking weak in front of the public. But the real problem wasn't a local vandal. It was the rot at the top. I stared at Marcus, my mind reeling. The graffiti, the defiance, the subtle shift of focus. It was all genius theater designed to manipulate Harrison into overreacting, thereby exposing his own vulnerability and, critically, forcing him to touch evidence that belonged to the federal prosecutor's office, which Marcus had clearly been working with, or at least communicating through an untraceable channel. You worked with the feds? I asked, my voice hoarse. Marcus nodded slightly toward the defense table. Not exactly with them. They just promised me they would make sure my community got the funding they've been fighting for, and that my record would be expunged if I could provide proof of the Chief Justice's shell corporations. Harrison's shady zoning deals were just the thread I needed to pull to get the Chief Justice's entire operation exposed. Harrison dropped my phone onto the desk as if it had burned him. It clattered against the wood, screen up, displaying the damning ledger. He slumped back into his elevated chair, defeated. He looked ancient, his robe suddenly seeming too big for his frame. "The Ethics Commission tip," Harrison murmured, glancing towards the ceiling vent. "That was real?" "Oh, absolutely real," Marcus confirmed. "But the audio recording you heard on your side? That was a loop I pre-recorded yesterday, designed to sound like a panicked confession, just in case you tried to lawyer up or call for a recess. The real recording, the one implicating you in the Albright deal, is already secured by people who don't need a judge's gavel to make things happen." Harrison closed his eyes. He knew the game was over. Blackmail only works if the target fears exposure more than the blackmailer. Marcus had engineered a situation where Harrison feared the consequences of not complying even more than he feared Marcus's threats, because complying meant accidentally incriminating the state's Chief Justice. "Dismiss the charges," Harrison said, his voice devoid of all inflection. He picked up the pen again, this time signing the dismissal order with a swift, practiced motion that spoke of years spent signing documents without reading them. He slid the paper across the desk toward me. "The matter of State versus Jenkins is dismissed with prejudice, effective immediately." The bailiff stepped back, recognizing the official end of the immediate crisis, though the larger one was only just beginning. I picked up the signed order, my hand still shaking, and looked at Marcus. "Go," I urged him. "Get out of here." Marcus nodded, picking up his worn backpack. He paused at the courtroom door, turning back one last time to face the wreckage he had created, his eyes meeting mine. There was no triumph there, only the grim satisfaction of survival. "Tell the community the wall is safe now," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out of the courtroom, disappearing into the hallway. The door swung shut, leaving Judge Harrison sitting alone, staring blankly at the phone resting beside his gavel. Within the hour, the state police had entered the courtroom, not for Marcus, but for Judge Harrison. The Chief Justice was arrested by federal agents later that afternoon, thanks to the evidence Marcus had successfully planted and retrieved, using a frightened teenager's petty crime as the smokescreen for the largest judicial corruption takedown this state had ever seen. As for me, I had a new client, the most notorious legal prodigy in the county, and a whole new definition of what mitigating circumstances could truly mean.